In the dark and stormy night of the 14th century, Europe was not just a place of kings, knights, and castles, but also a land trembling under the shadow of a great and terrifying enemy. Imagine a world where monsters with sharp swords and fierce eyes were not just in fairy tales but were real, and they were called the Turks. These were not just any invaders. They were a relentless force that swept across lands, leaving destruction and fear in their wake. The year was 1396, and the world was on the brink of a cataclysmic event that would change the course of history forever. The story begins in Bulgaria, a land that had already seen its share of battles. The Bulgarian Tsar, Ivan Shishman, was a man caught between two powerful forces. On one side, he was a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, which meant he had to obey the Sultan Bajazet. On the other side, he was a ruler who had to protect his people from the relentless Turkish advances. When Bajazet demanded that Shishman support the Turkish army with troops and supplies, Shishman refused. This was a fatal mistake. Bajazet, known for his fiery temper, did not take kindly to defiance. He imprisoned Shishman in Nicopolis, a city that would soon become a symbol of Turkish power. Not content with just imprisoning him, Bajazet had Shishman strangled, turning his kingdom into a mere Turkish province. The fall of Bulgaria sent shockwaves through Eastern Europe. King Sigismund of Hungary, who was now the last organized state standing against the Turks, felt the full weight of this threat. Sigismund was a man of many contradictions. He was tall, strong, and handsome, with a commanding presence that made him a natural leader. But he was also pleasure-loving, extravagant, and had a reputation for scandalous love affairs. Despite these flaws, he was a brave and intelligent ruler, and he knew that the survival of his kingdom depended on the support of the West. Sigismund's appeals for help grew more desperate as the Turkish threat loomed larger. He sent envoys to the West, but the response was lukewarm at best. The West, particularly the major powers like France and England, had their own problems to deal with. They were more concerned with their internal squabbles and the renewed Anglo-French War than with the distant threat of the Turks. The Pope, who had been calling for a crusade against the Turks for decades, had more interest in reuniting the Eastern and Western churches than in launching a full-scale military campaign. But Sigismund did not give up. He continued to plead for help, and his efforts eventually caught the attention of the Duke of Burgundy, one of the most powerful men in Europe. Burgundy, whose real name was Philip the Bold, saw the crusade as an opportunity to magnify his own power and prestige. He began to plan a grand and lavish expedition, one that would not only defeat the Turks, but also showcase the wealth and might of the French nobility. The preparations for the crusade were as extravagant as they were misguided. Burgundy demanded a vast sum of money from Flanders, which was already struggling from years of civil war. The money was used to fund the creation of elaborate garments and decorations, rather than practical military equipment. The French nobles, eager to display their status, poured resources into ornate armor and banners, while the actual logistics of the campaign were largely ignored. In 1395, a delegation of Hungarian knights and a bishop arrived in Paris to plead for help. They painted a vivid and terrifying picture of the Turkish atrocities: Christians being thrown into dungeons, children being taken and converted to Islam, and women being despoiled. Their words struck a chord with the French court, and King Charles VI, who was known for his piety, declared that it was his duty to defend Christianity against the miscreants. The enthusiasm for the crusade was infectious, and soon many of the most powerful nobles in France had taken the cross. Among those who answered the call was Enguerrand de Coucy, a seasoned warrior and one of the most respected knights in the realm. Coucy was a man of great experience, having fought in numerous battles and campaigns. He was chosen to lead the French contingent, alongside the young and inexperienced Jean de Nevers, the son of the Duke of Burgundy. Nevers, who was not yet a knight, was given nominal command of the crusade, but it was Coucy who would be the true leader. The Crusaders set out in the summer of 1396, a colorful and impressive sight as they marched through the countryside. They were a mix of seasoned veterans and young nobles, all united by a sense of duty and adventure. But beneath the surface, there were deep divisions. The French nobles, who were used to their own ways of fighting, did not always see eye to eye with the more practical and experienced Hungarian troops. The Crusaders also lacked a clear understanding of the Turkish tactics and the terrain they would be fighting in. The journey to Hungary was long and arduous. The Crusaders had to cross the Alps and the Danube, facing challenges such as treacherous rivers and hostile locals. Along the way, they picked up more troops, including a contingent of German knights and a group of English archers led by the Earl of Derby, who would later become King Henry IV of England. As the Crusaders approached the Danube, they received word that the Turkish army was gathering in the Balkans. The news was both a relief and a cause for concern. The Crusaders were eager to engage the enemy, but they were also aware that the Turks were a formidable force. Sultan Bajazet, known as the Thunderbolt for his swift and ruthless campaigns, was a military genius. He had already conquered much of the Balkans and was now poised to strike at Hungary. The Crusaders reached the city of Nicopolis in September 1396. Nicopolis was a strategic stronghold, and the Crusaders believed that capturing it would give them a significant advantage. They laid siege to the city, but the Turks were already on their way. Bajazet, who had been planning his campaign carefully, arrived with a large and well-organized army. The Crusaders were caught off guard, and the battle that followed was a disaster. The Battle of Nicopolis, which took place on September 25, 1396, was a turning point in the history of the Crusades. The French and Hungarian forces, despite their bravery, were no match for the disciplined and experienced Turkish army. The Turks used superior tactics, including a feigned retreat that lured the Crusaders into a trap. The result was a massacre. Thousands of Crusaders were killed, and many more were taken prisoner, including Jean de Nevers and Enguerrand, and de Coucy. The defeat at Nicopolis had far-reaching consequences. It was a catastrophic blow to the morale of the Christian world, and a major victory for the Turks. Bajazet, who had already earned a reputation as a ruthless conqueror, became even more feared and respected. The battle also exposed the weaknesses of the European Crusade movement, which was often hampered by internal divisions and a lack of strategic planning. For King Sigismund, the defeat was a personal tragedy. He had risked everything to defend his kingdom, and now he was left with nothing. Sigismund himself escaped the battle, but his kingdom was left vulnerable, and the Turks continued their advance. The fall of Nicopolis marked the end of Hungary's resistance, and the beginning of a long and painful period of Turkish domination in the region. The aftermath of the Battle of Nicopolis was a dark time for Europe. The captured Crusaders, including Jean de Nevers and Enguerrand de Coucy, were held as prisoners of war. Some were ransomed, but many were forced to convert to Islam or were sold into slavery. The news of the defeat spread quickly, and it sent shockwaves through the Christian world. The Pope, who had been a strong advocate of the Crusade, was deeply disappointed, and the European powers began to reassess their approach to the Turkish threat. In the years that followed, the Ottoman Empire continued to expand, eventually becoming one of the most powerful states in the world. The Battle of Nicopolis was a stark reminder of the dangers of underestimating a determined and well-organized enemy. It was a lesson that would be repeated throughout history, as powerful nations and empires found themselves humbled by smaller but more agile forces. The story of the Battle of Nicopolis is not just a tale of military defeat, but also a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the importance of unity. The Crusaders, despite their bravery and noble intentions, were undone by their own divisions and a lack of understanding of their enemy. It is a story that resonates even today, as we continue to grapple with the challenges of a complex and often unpredictable world. In the end, the Battle of Nicopolis serves as a reminder that the path to victory is often paved with humility, preparation, and a deep respect for the strengths of one's adversaries. The world may have changed since the 14th century, but the lessons of history remain as relevant as ever.